the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, guys.
Good evening.
Item on the agenda tonight is the review of conformance of Hudson Heritage and secret findings for a proposed modified development master plan, 750 residential units, 350,000 square feet new commercial space, and the adaptive reuse of the administration building of 80,000 square feet, along with 5 other structures. And let's just move right into it.
Good evening. Thank you for hearing us this evening. Here tonight, I'm Marty Berger, principal of Sabre, EFG Sabre, LLC, the developer owner of the property. With me tonight is Kyle Ahern of Chazen Engineering and Phil Greeley of Mazer Traffic. If it's all right with you, I'd like to report what we've accomplished since the last time we've been together, which basically encompasses work sessions, if you will, with Mr. Welty and the group that following the last the comments that were made at the last public meeting, along with some changes to the site plan. What I'd like to do is just walk you through some of the decisions.
Hey, Marty, do you think you could speak into the portable or the handheld? There's something going on with that mic.
It's got a little ring to it.
Maybe, or maybe it's a speaker, but at least try.
Try it, yeah.
Need a second. Yeah, there it goes. Okay. What I'd like to do is...
Oh, well,
Gotta try.
that one's easier then.
So I'd like to do is walk you through some of the decisions that we seem to reach with the staff at our meeting following the last planning board meeting. We discussed resolutions. We reached resolutions, at least to the major points, subject to the board's consent. There was an issue on the proper recreation fee to be paid by the development. It went back and forth. We presented the cases at our last meeting, and it seemed that what we agreed to, or what we reached subject again to the board's approval, is to pay 63% of the recreation fee for each residential base bedroom. The figure ties to the active percentage of the town's recreation budget.
Right.
The other significant item that we discussed was the trigger date. As you know, there's a requirement that, as in the existing approvals, that tie the commencement or the posting of a bond for the demolition of the work in Phase 2 to a certain occupancy of Phase 1. It was 200,000 square feet, and we have proposed, and I think we're in agreement to reduce it to 193,000 square feet. Along those lines, one of the arguments or one of the concerns of the town was to be sure that there wasn't a scenario where a developer came in, completed Phase 1, the commercial, made so much money that he just left without completing the rest of the work. And toward that end, we opened our books and reviewed our financial performance and budgets with Attorney Cooper. And I think we've reasonably satisfied him that that's not the case. I think we're negative $10 to $12 million if we successfully complete Phase 1. And the other element as to why it was part of the approval was to ensure a integrated development, meaning residential, commercial, etc. And that was more important under the old plan, where the residential was in Phase 2 alone. We have all of that within Phase 1, so it seems to solve or address the requirement as to why it was first put in. We discussed the open space, particularly the Great Lawn, the fact that there needed to be assurance that on a recorded memorandum type basis that the open space and the Great Lawns were protected and preserved for their intended use. So we worked through those issues with Mr. Hellman, Mr. Welty, and Liz Axelson, etc. We identified that we knew that we needed to discuss the managing and the maintenance of the responsibilities of all the areas, and we knew that we would have some sort of a property owners association. And the purpose of the Property Owners Association is to take care of the common development or the common aspects, which include the parking and the other improvements that we make within the right-of-way of the roads, the benches, the common water lines and service lines to the extent that they're outside of the right-of-ways, common storm drainage, so on and so forth, management, maintenance-related issues. So we had lengthy discussions on that. We've had Attorney Wise frame out how the property association would work, what it would be responsible for, and I think we're all in agreement as to how that will work and how it will be addressed going forward. We continue to talk about the Winslow Gate Road easement, which is a little title issue. We've reached out and had a couple of conversations with the owner and their representatives of the Home Depot Center. We're fairly confident that we'll be able to work something out and resolve it with them. And the backup to that is condemnation. As far as the historic preservation, there was a request to basically write the requirements for reporting and inspections and to detail that in a little bit greater detail, to include also some of the ancillary buildings, so we did that as well. As I reported last time, we actually have our surveyor and the architect and the structural engineer working on creating the best way to stabilize and rebuild the roof component of the administration building. In fact, the surveyors were there today working on the inside of the building. So we're probably about 30, 45 days away from having a plan as to what to do with that. There were some design tweaks made to the architectural design guidelines, and we've incorporated the suggestions and requests that were presented to us, and we submitted it electronically, and we brought copies of all of that here today, so you have that. That's basically what we've been up to, and the discussions that we've had with Mr. Welty and Mr. Holman and Liz and the other staff members, and I think we're ready to dot the I and cross the T with any last-minute questions that you have tonight, and are hoping to be able to move forward for a resolution of approval at our next meeting. Kyle has a few changes or tweaks to the site plan that he'd like to walk through, and then we're available to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, thanks.
Good evening. Kyle Ahern with the Chasen Companies. So going through the plan set, you probably won't see that many things that really jump out to you, because at this stage in the game, most of these tweaks and revisions are similar to last meeting, where I described how we were adding more detail to the plans. So we're kind of getting into the nitty-gritty at this point. But one thing that has changed is the roundabout that was discussed at the last meeting. Conceptually, that's been added to the plans. You'll see that here at the intersection of Winslow Gate Road and Hudson, well, what was Hudson View Drive, and what still needs to be approved by the county, but what we've proposed is Hudson Heritage Drive, and that's actually because the existing Hudson View Drive is located to the east of the site on state property. There's actually an existing church back there with that address, and we're cutting that off because it currently comes through from the east, comes down to the what we're now calling Hudson Heritage Drive. That'll be essentially cut in two different pieces. So that'll be renamed on our site to Hudson Heritage Drive, or if that's not accepted, whatever comes after that. So that roundabout was added to the plans. What was previously a cul-de-sac at the end of Hudson Heritage Drive, which will be a roundabout in Phase 2 once there's additional connections into that. That has been revised to match the new roundabout. And then there's been a third cul-de-sac at the end of the eastern property line at Paint Shop Road. And that was essentially because part of the development master plan is that this project will connect out to Route 9G through the state property. But in the interim, there will be a time period where that connection is blocked off. We don't control the state land, so we can't facilitate that connection beyond our property line. So in the time being, there will be a cul-de-sac here so that if you come down Paint Shop Road, you have somewhere to turn around. Beyond that, we provided a preliminary plat that shows the proposed subdivision and the lot lines, and it shows the proposed easements and descriptions of those easements. We've also provided utility profiles, so again, we're getting into more, more detailed information was provided. The profiles were provided, sizing calculations for the sanitary sewer and stormwater was provided. We got more into the construction phasing detail, so we provided additional plans for that, showing how, phase one will be, from start to full build out of phase one. We have 4 sub-phases, so we detailed that out. There were additional pedestrian connections added to the plan. One at the daycare. There were connections within the parking lot itself, but we've added connections so that you can walk from here to the grocery store or down to other areas of the site as well. We also added a connection in front of the director's residence. There was no direct connection up to Winslow Gate Road, so that is now directly connected. And I believe that is it. And the outdoor dining areas that were previously shown, we just provided a zoning calculation for the seating, or the parking that would be required as part of that. And we're still in excess of the requirement there.
Okay. All right, sounds good. You guys been doing a lot of homework over the last month.
Yeah.
And getting through a lot of the last minute details. Eric, you want to something first? Or?
Well, staff have just a short review to supplement or complement the comments of the planning board's consultant. They're pretty straightforward. They're there in your package. It's mostly, Marty covered some, I won't repeat. The Winslow Gate issue we're suggesting is something that needs to be, we need to know how it's going to happen ahead of time, because that hasn't really been discussed with the town board and would require a later action. So that's something we hope to have conversations with them in advance of or by the time of the next submittal. He covered recreation. That's correct. We consulted with the recreation director and staff, and that seemed acceptable, if it's also acceptable to the board. Some of the association for the management of the common utilities and such, that's fine. We're okay on that. Otherwise, I think we'll let it go. Just kudos to both to the applicant's staff and the town staff for doing some significant cramming to make in advance of this meeting. And I don't know if David wants to add anything or not.
Where we are at this point is staff staff is taking action to prepare your board for resolutions at the next meeting. A secret determination, development master plan consistency, and a site plan approval, as well as preliminary subdivision approval. A lot of the heavy lifting that's going on now, not behind the scenes, is determining what needs to be, what plans need to be, details need to be added to the plans before your board can take action versus what can be a condition of the approval, and then when that condition needs to be satisfied. So, for example, before the chairman signs the site plan, before final subdivision plat approval, before issuance of certificate of occupancy. All of those details we're close to finalizing them. There's some, as you can see in the staff memos, there's some details that we're still going back and forth on, but we believe that by the next meeting it should be all ironed out and before your board for action.
All right, thanks, Dave. Move on to Liz for.
Okay, so yes, there was a lot of effort in the last review, and there were a lot of revisions that were made. So we tried to be very thorough, go through, find out where the revisions had been made, and the response letter was very helpful. I don't want to repeat anything that either David or Eric said, but I have to say this: 6 heads are better than 1. Working in a couple of conference calls, we all kind of put our heads together with Anthony Russo and figured out what was needed. So I just want to do a brief walkthrough for the board. So this review that I did dated April 26. Again, my name is Liz Axelson with CPL, planning consultant to the planning board. And I'm going to skip right over to page 4. What we tried to do with this, in consultation with Eric and Michael, is, so on page 4, I'm beginning to talk about site plan review, but there are 2 headers. So the first header is items to be addressed, agreed to before Phase 1 site plan approval, which we're hoping there will be some response. And then if you just flip to page 5, you'll see items to be addressed as conditions of Phase 1 site plan approval. In other words, those could be included in the resolution. They're rather technical details. Just to touch on a few, Eric has already mentioned the recreation fee that I touch on in comment number 7, with a 37% reduction of the full recreation fee for Phase 1 for the project for 134 apartments containing 192 bedrooms at $1,250 per bedroom. And the full fee would have been $240,000 when reduced as basically agreed at this point. The fee would be $151,200. The architectural materials, I'll take a look at those. Michael kind of jumped in and did some notes on those. And so we now have an April 19th set of architectural guidelines. I'll go over those. So we've had some response on that. We're asking for some specific changes to the notation about inspections of the 6 historic structures. I'm looking at my comment number 9 on page 4. Making sure that those are quarterly structural inspections, which is basically what the notation says, and that the period of these inspections could be increased to 6 months based on consultation with the town and based on the reports provided to the town after each inspection. One of the things I don't know that the board has given any input on, my comment number 10, has to do with what is proposed for the central circle in the middle of the roundabout at the intersection of Hudson Heritage Drive and Winslow Gate Road. For example, a clock, a sculpture, or some other decorative item. So I don't know if the board would like to give input on that at some point. And then I created notation for the land banked parking. This is my comment number 11, which gives each lot that has commercial occupancies on it a year from the latest occupancy, basically, if you read the language, for the town and the applicant to figure out whether or not the additional land banked parking would need to be constructed. And I felt the year from the last C of O would probably be enough time to figure that out. And then I defer to the traffic consultant's comments. But I did ask for some more pointers to the highway improvement plan, off-site improvements. Those will be dealt with by DOT permitting, but it would be nice to just make those a little more obvious on the plans. And then we're also asking for a more direct pedestrian pathway from the future rail trail into the site to connect to Lot 5 at its southeastern corner. There is a connection that goes over, I believe, to Lot 1, but it's a little far for folks to go and then have to loop back to, say, the apartments and the daycare center and all that. So we'd like something a little more directly, I don't have a pointer,
So
but it's the
it's hidden a
south,
little bit by the property
southeast
line,
corner.
but there is actually a connection right here.
Where's it go to?
oh man, I see.
Where does it go?
So from the rail trail connection up here, comes down.
I was thinking more like there, in that corner. I'm sorry, my hands are not steady at all.
And you're further.
This is the back of a commercial building. No one's going to use it, and Ron Hicks at the county wants a significant entry area because he's going to tie this and promote it as a link to the park. So we thought the best place location would be here, in this location.
We also don't control between the rail trail and our property is this embankment here. So we talked about grades, I think that was 2 meetings ago. I said it's too steep of a grade to get down. There is actually one area down here that's a little more manageable from a grading perspective, but again, we don't control the land between the actual trail and the property line.
Okay.
Whose property is that?
Well, CSX and to be the county, unless the
County.
county's already taken ownership.
Okay.
I'm not
I'm
sure.
not sure if they have yet.
Kyle, just to elaborate on, because we did this, she mentioned collective effort, and that was one of the things we talked about collectively. Part of the thinking there was that there's no objection to the central connection that Ron Hicks and you talked about. That's a really central point and a good one. The thinking that went into the comment was that the residences all along Hudson View Drive and the daycare center and the gym are all likely to have some degree of pedestrian traffic between those locations and the rail trail. And as it sits right now, the connection from the southern side of those structures, which is a significant pedestrian traffic area for those uses, the only access to the path in the direction of the rail trail is up a flight of stairs.
Well, for the residential, they can come up Hudson View Drive without any stairs. Yeah, so the
And for
only,
the daycare?
the daycare
So
would,
Liz had suggested that an obvious connection point, since there was already a pedestrian walkway from the daycare, entirely separate from the supermarket area, this pedestrian access from the daycare all the way down to Winslow Drive. Her thought was that by extending that northward, there is a pathway that is not significant in terms of grades, all the way to the rail trail.
where are we talking? Are we talking
From
over
the
here?
daycare, from
that daycare.
from that corner, from the
area,
daycare,
and really kind of straight.
yeah, just kind of straight, it kind of if you wander up there, there's pathways which, at least on the contour map, don't look like they would be significant. So maybe you could, maybe it's a problem, but if you could take a look at it and
Okay.
consider it.
Sure.
And I think that's what Liz was asking you to do. Does
I-
that capture it?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Just to close the issue, I don't mind doing a walkway if it's reasonably expected that it can be built and people are going to use it.
Right.
I don't view one that goes along the back side of a commercial building with truck deliveries as being viable.
I guess the thought was that it would be kind of running along the northern edge of that drive where there's a walkway and go straight back. Like, it really wouldn't go behind, it wouldn't go in that direction, really.
It would actually go away from.
It would go kind of straight, almost east, I
So when
believe.
you're walking down the path, you're not looking into the back end of this building, in other words.
No, you're walking by, you're looking at the daycare on your left, and you'd see the side of the grocery on your right, but you'd be going straight. You wouldn't be curving around, you'd be just going straight back to that rail trail. That was the concept, anyway.
That's what I was trying to get at a meeting or two ago, with that, there's a lot of apartments and whole college dorms and everything to the south, and they were gonna wanna shop for groceries or whatever versus if they have to walk all the way up and around, they're less likely to.
Well, I think we're better off putting it on the other side, on the south side, if possible.
That's where I thought it would be good if there's a way
Yeah,
to
I
get.
think the grades work
if there's a
better
way
on the
to get
south.
through
So
there.
we'll look into something.
Take a
look.
look and then, give us a response. It's, it was just a.
It'd be an extra connection to the rail trail would be.
Anything else, Liz, on?
And then, as I said, page 5 and through the top of page 7, a lot of technical details. If the board has any questions, you can let me know, but the idea was to kind of pull things together. One of the things that we looked at, and this was partly in response to Kyle's letter, was that subdivision plans A and B really aren't needed as much anymore.
Because we have the plat.
Right, and we have the plat, and so the idea was, how can we tie it all together, add what we need to the plat? So the idea was to have proposed development sort of ghosted in on the plat. I don't know how possible that is to do, but you have existing conditions, so we figured. So anyway, I gave some detail on how to put that together. But if you go to the middle of page 7, there are items to be addressed before preliminary subdivision plat approval. Part of it had to do with, in Kyle's response letter, there was a lot of text, very descriptive, kind of a beginning outline of a property owner's management entity, and I'm suggesting to use that text to create a draft I'm just emphasizing draft, outline for review by the planning board's attorney of that property owner's management entity, and add plan notation referring to the outlined items and the instruments that will govern these elements for site development. Again, a draft document with narrative about the future ownership and/or management of Lot 12, which is the Great Lawn and North Buffer area. Again, some of that text is in your response letter. Including what interim and later entity would own and manage Lot 12 and the Great Lawn, et cetera. If that could be submitted for review, at least we can start looking at those items. Let's see. And then I'm asking for more pointers to the off-site improvements. Regarding the fire safety mitigation measures, we were a little unclear what was the fate of Lot 14, so we had some questions about that. And those are the big ones. Other than that, as the board knows by now, I've made a general recommendation that the planning board may consider to direct staff and consultants to prepare resolutions as described by Mr. Cooper. So, any questions?
All right, thanks, Liz.
I'll just, Carl, since Anthony Russo, the board's traffic consultant, couldn't make it tonight, his comments came in today. They're in your
Yes,
packets.
I was going to mention.
And I think a lot of them are technical in tweaking to pavement markings and signage. The one the board that you may want to discuss, or the applicant may want to discuss with the board, has to do with the drive-throughs. I know a whiles back, there was I think for a long time, there was one drive-through anticipated, which is still there. There's two additional drive-throughs, and one of the particular, the consultant directed a number of comments. There was a map with very, very small call-out comments on it, but if you looked at it on the screen and blew it up, it was along one of the retails in the middle of the strip that Winslow Gate had a rear entry to a queue that exited onto one of the north-south, east-west access roads. It would exit very close to Winslow Drive, and he had a number of concerns with respect. Yeah, with respect to that drive-through location, and since that relates to the use, you might want to have a discussion about how that might work.
Saw some traffic conflicts there, I think.
And that may be something that we should look at, offline with him, to see if there are solutions that would make that work a little bit better. That was the main thing. I think everything else was mostly markings and.
Yeah, you had a lot of observations of pavement markings, stop bars, and crosswalks and such to take a look at. Let's move to engineering.
Thank you. Andy Learn with CPL, engineering consultant to the board. As Kyle said, they've done a lot of work. It shows 40 some odd sheets on the drawings. There's a lot more detail here than there was before, a lot to review, but they put a lot of work into it. Our comments are mainly technical in nature, most of which, if not all, could be conditions of approval if the board should desire.
Okay.
I'm just going to touch on, like Liz said, I'm going to touch on a couple of them. One of our concerns was, as we noted earlier, the Winslow Gate Drive entrance and the property line issue there. Another is the formation of sewer districts. That needs to happen. That obviously can be a condition of approval. Let's see. Again, plenty of details have been added. A few more need to be taken care of. The road section details need a little more information as far as cross slopes and, road construction details that would normally be provided. That should be added to the plans. One of the things that was required as part of the seeker mitigation measures was a pressure reducing station. Some details need to be provided on that, and the location of it shown in the plans needs to be adjusted slightly. It's currently shown in Hudson Heritage Drive. That should be slid off outside the pavement area, just to make that a little more easy to access and maintain.
Okay.
Also, as far as the phasing is concerned, something that it needs to be considered is that
and talked about, the phasing plan focuses a lot on getting the sewer rerouted, particularly for the line, the force main from the CIA, and that reasonably so. But the phasing also needs to consider the water service and getting that to the grocery store, which I believe is going to be an early construction. So that needs to be looked at and made sure that there are some fills that are going to be happening later on, and make sure we have adequate cover over that water line, and it's included in the construction that happens with the sewer that's also being extended from Paint Shop Road. So just some, again, it's not a big deal, but it's something to be considered. And then finally, I'm going to mention that we got a lot of pipe sizing calculations for drainage and also for sanitary. Most of which looked pretty good, but the sizing, which was based on, I believe, flow metering calculations that were done, which was looking at actual flow rates going through the town's flow meter, sanitary flow meter, indicated flow rates of approaching 1 million, or I believe just over 1 million gallons a day, which is about double what the MOU is for between the town and the state and the property. So we just need to have a little more clarification on what the expected flow rates are. And I believe a lot of that has to do with what's coming through the site from the Hudson River Psychiatric Center.
Right.
So that issue may be resolved once that line is cut off, but we'll need to kind of talk about that a little bit more. So.
All right, thanks. Just want to add to the water line issue, we learned from another project to make sure there's water available during construction as well for firefighting needs, if that shows up. So as the phasing of the water lines goes through, keep that in mind. All right, at this point, I just wanted to again thank all our consultants for the innumerable hours and stuff spent on all the last minute details here. It's been a lot to push through, as well as the applicant gave it a lot of thorough responses over the last few weeks here. So be able to move it forward. At this point, we'll go around the board for comments.
Do the public hearing.
Oh, right, let me do that first. Let me move that we open the public hearing for this project.
Second.
Moved and seconded, call to question, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Is there anyone in the audience wish to comment on this application at this time?
If you guys wouldn't mind letting the person sit down, thank you.
Hi there.
Hi.
I'm Stephanie Lewison. I've spoken at these meetings before. Not sure what the procedure is, but I do have written comments, and I didn't know if that would be something that I could submit in addition to me speaking them at this meeting?
Yes, you can
Okay.
hand
Well,
them in here.
after this, I'll hand you guys a copy. So I did take a look at the documents. They are extensive. And I just had some thoughts. First, on the preliminary site plans. This is the first that I'd noticed any discussion of the steam tunnels that are present on the property, and I was just throwing it out there because I have interest in any kind of retaining of the history of the site, and I didn't know if there's any consideration to keeping any of the steam tunnels around and maybe doing something interesting with them, art exhibit-wise, history-wise. I'm sure that they are in probably not great shape, and you probably have some safety concerns, but just something to kind of mull over in your heads a little bit. And then my other big comment about the preliminary site plans, again, I don't know or claim to understand exactly the subdivision, preliminary subdivision hearing or whatever the terminology is that's being done here, so I didn't know exactly at what point the subdivision will be finalized, but I did notice that it includes a subdivision of Phase 2, which is something that, there's only been kind of minor discussions about at this point, and I feel like if you start subdividing Phase 2 now, that you'll start creating barriers to potential changes to the plans later, saying, oh, well, we've already spent time and money and effort to subdivide it a certain way, and now we don't want to change it later. So I thought that maybe we shouldn't necessarily be subdividing the Phase 2 section just yet, unless, of course, there's some other procedural reasons that I'm not understanding. And if there are some procedural reasons, or we do want to move forward with the subdivision of Phase 2 at this point, I just had some thoughts about that. And one is the power plant building. I know has not been slated as being anything that'll be kept, but buildings of that nature are very on trend these days for being maintained on a site and becoming something like breweries or retail establishments or even residential properties. And so, again, if we're going to think about Phase 2 a little bit, I didn't want to preclude the idea of the power plant being considered for reuse, a year or two from now, or whatever it is that we start having those discussions. And then my other signature topic is trees. And it's my understanding that the Phase 2 area does contain more mature and characteristic trees of the area, the big sycamores or northern plane, whatever you call them. And so I wanted to bring up the idea of having an inventory of the trees that are greater than, say, 12 inches diameter breast height, and having those recorded on the existing conditions plans and the proposed conditions plans, so that maybe there can be some consideration of the ability to maybe realign roads or shift things a little bit to try to keep some of them around, just so that you kind of, again, keep with the history of the site. So it doesn't become just a blank slate with a couple of old buildings, but you actually remember that this was, has, a couple hundred years of history behind it. So those are my comments on the preliminary site plan. Regarding the design standards, which I thought it was interesting that no one brought up, it is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that each individual building will come before the board. So obviously right now it's just kind of design concepts. I did like what I saw for the buildings along Winslow Gate Road. Those are incorporating design elements of the existing campus, which looks wonderful. And then you move behind to the grocery store, which looks nothing like anything, like it's just kind of a grocery long store. It doesn't have any kind of design elements meshing with the other buildings. And then also the residential building concept is certainly not really matching too much with anything. It's gray. It doesn't have brick. It doesn't have really much stone. It's just, and it's big and imposing, especially when you add the peaked roofs. I mean, it looks like a 4-story building instead of a 3-story building. Look at elevation-wise, they're already starting at an elevation much higher, well, not much, but higher than like the Winslow Gate area. So I just didn't know how that would look if you're driving along in this beautiful, roundabout, and oh my gosh, there's these giant blocky buildings with, again, no design elements to them. They're just kind of mostly flat on the sides. So I just thought that they should maybe blend in a little bit more with the surrounding area. And those were my comments.
All right, thanks for speaking
Thank you.
tonight.
Who should I give my comments to?
Give
Give it to Carol.
Carol over there.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else on the audience wish to speak on this application tonight? Come on down.
Good evening. My name is John Ansbach. I live at 20 Big Meadow Lane, which is in the town of Hyde Park. I've been involved somewhat in this project for over 10 to 15 years when I was chairman of the Board of Fire Commissioners at Fairview. And by the way, I've been a member for 47 years there. When Governor Cuomo Sr. decided to close that facility,
Yep.
we had taken them to task, and for a while they were helping us financially. But you got to understand, When that facility closed, there was 5,000 employees that lost their jobs. It devastated the merchants in Fairview. It devastated the whole Fairview area. Marist has helped, but that's one eyesore. Schatz Federal's another eyesore, and the old Staples area is another eyesore in the north end of the town of Poughkeepsie. I firmly believe this project will enhance the north end of the town of Poughkeepsie. It definitely will help the Fairview Fire District with their taxes. Being a longtime member, Fairview Fire District is the only fire district in the town of Poughkeepsie that does not have the retirement plan because it was my decision at that time that we could not afford it. Talking to the board, this gentleman here has been more than eloquent to try to work with our needs and work with our problems, reading your documents and what the proposed taxes are going to be that he has to pay. I'm not a mathematician, but the minimum that I see is a $300 reduction of my $1,860 a year and being retired. I think their plan is excellent. I knew Mr. Moss and Rich Chazen. I worked with them. I worked on that site when I was working, doing some environmental consulting and cleanup. And I think this board has to. And I've known you put them through a lot because I've been to every meeting. I really feel that this gentleman has went above and beyond to the town of Poughkeepsie. And I think if this project goes, that dump at Schatz Federal, I think there'll be other developers wanting to come in here and clean that mess up like this gentleman has. And I fully support it. Again, you got an excellent plan. If I want to go shopping, now I'm a senior citizen, if I want to go shopping, either I go to Stop and Rob in Hyde Park or I go to Hannaford's and Red Hook because there's no grocery store. Job lots open up, at least I can go buy a pair of socks. Prior to that, you couldn't even get a pair of socks unless I went to the South Road. So I think this concept, and if he does the restaurants like he says, it'll be a nice area, not only for the college, but for the town. And I think it'll set an example for planning throughout the north end of the town, because basically that's all that's left to be developed in the town when you look at it. I'm 73 years old. I lived in Fairview for 50 years, and there's nothing, other than college bars, and we don't need them. There's enough headaches. But I commend him for the plan that he has, and I strongly urge the board to pass this plan, because I know what Mr. Moss and Mr. Chazen went through. Not your fault, but the town's fault. People not getting the water in the sewer district should have been all set prior to this gentleman buying his property. It didn't happen. And that's not your problem. That's the town's problem. But I strongly urge that you pass this project, because I think it's going to be some, not only financial shot, but it's going to be a shot in the arm for the town of Poughkeepsie. That's going to be a very, very nice project for everybody involved. And we have a lot of tourism coming in, and I think his restaurants and his shops will only enhance and bring the tax revenue that will help not only Fairview, but the town of Poughkeepsie. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. We also appreciate the developer has taken on this task in our town. Anyone else wish to comment on this? Seeing none, I move that we adjourn the public hearing to, let's see, do we want to do a special meeting, or I could adjourn it to May for?
Why don't we do it to the May meeting, and then we can always re-adjourn.
Then we'll re-adjourn to whatever we decide, because I move that we adjourn the public hearing to May 16th, 2019.
Second.
Well, it's moved and seconded. Call the question. All those in favor?
16th?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0.
6 now.
Oh, right. He had to leave. 6-0, sorry. And we'll you'll work with the staff here on trying to figure out a date unless you think it'll be the June meeting, but if you want to do something sooner, we'll work on something special.
Okay, thank you. Anything else you want to?
All right, let's go around the board for comments from everybody. We start with Peter
We
tonight.
gotta go to about 4.
I have a question for you. Have you participated yourself directly in conversations with the adjacent property owner about Winslow Gate, the access there?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, the answer is yes.
Can you characterize the tone of the conversation? Without,
The tone of the conversation was, it was, number one, a very detailed explanation of what was required. It was the request to provide a more detailed plan that shows the amount of land currently utilized by the intersection, plus any additional land that we're proposing. It turned out, I think there was 300 square feet or so of additional land that would be involved. It was the idea of how to better integrate the design elements of our property into their development to make it look and feel like one. There was the question or request of whether or not there would be any compensation for the land.
But did they seem to favor?
Those were the discussion points. He understands the benefits associated with it, and it's an ongoing conversation. The fellow that owns it is an elderly fellow. He was away for a couple of weeks for the holiday. One of his associates came to the site today. We looked at the intersection, and he understood it. He got it. He was wondering how to even better integrate the two properties via the connection that currently exists, which is a turn into Winslow and then a turn into the Home Depot property, to see if there was a better way to widen it.
My question really is, do you have a timeline? Do you have any sense of?
I really don't. This fellow, seems to move at his own pace. This is not his top priority. He was away for the last couple of weeks, so his representatives have everything, and I hope that in the next week or two, they'll be able to further the conversation with him.
The reason I asked the question is obvious. We're being advised that we can't approve the site plan without without resolving this issue. If we follow course of your fallback, which would be for the town to condemn that property, that would require a considerable amount of time and money. Have you had any discussions with the town to see if they have any interest in following that course of action in terms of condemnation?
Let me just jump in because I want to make sure the understanding is correct, because the advice, I think, of staff, and certainly from a legal perspective, is that's not a precondition to the board acting at the next meeting. It's certainly a condition that would have to be addressed before.
Let me read it. It is still unclear if a portion of Winslow Gate Road located on adjacent private property is available for the applicant to improve and dedicate to the town as proposed. The disposition of this land area and the dependent design of proposed Winslow Gate Road 9 access improvements should be resolved prior to planning board site plan or subdivision approval. The recourse of condemnation by the town board, as suggested by the applicant, would require advance approval and has not been discussed. That's why I'm raising this issue now. We've had this several times in several different meetings, and
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but let me respond.
Yeah.
I've read the memo. I know we've all gone through it. The issue is understanding how they want to approach it. So now we've just heard from the applicant that they are in discussions with the owner. I don't think it would be appropriate for the planning board to insert itself into whatever those negotiations are. However, to the extent that there are negotiations ongoing, they're not a prerequisite. The negotiations ending are not a prerequisite.
I understand. My concern is if it's feasible or not. In other words, because that is a concern.
Absolutely, yeah, makes sense. But it's absolutely feasible from a planning perspective. And the issue is title, who owns it. And the response that the applicant is giving, which is if there is no resolution of the issue, there is the option of condemnation is valid. The issue you're bringing up is has there been a conversation with the town board yet? I would submit to you that it's premature for that to occur, because I think the applicant should be negotiating with its private adjacent property owner. To the extent
Absolutely.
that there's an issue, then bring it to the town's attention. I think.
If I may also, we have other alternatives as well to procure the intersection at the location.
That's fine. We just need to know what they are.
Correct.
Right, and
We need
ultimately,
to know tonight.
right, ultimately, they could, if they're not, if the negotiations don't come to fruition and the town doesn't want to condemn, they could come back for an amendment to the site plan. So that there are options.
But keep in mind, even if the town just determines that it does want to go through condemnation, that's a lengthy process.
I'm condemnation
I'm sure
counsel
you're
to many municipalities, but the issue, I honestly, from the perspective of where we are procedurally with the planning board, I think it would be premature for that conversation to occur with the town board. Let the applicant deal with the private, their private landowner in a private negotiation before the planning board even gets involved.
There's no question about it.
Okay.
I just believe let's keep the lights on so that we know, where everyone and everything stands. That's all I'm saying.
Just for the record, I could shift the entrance very, very little and not require anything from the adjacent property owner. So if I need to, I'll just shift the entrance very so slightly to the north, and I'll be done with it.
It's a wonderful world. That's great.
Yep. But if you can get that worked out with them, that's a good location for it.
I just want to know where we stand. That's all. It's the only reason I asked the question.
Anything else?
We had addressed at the last meeting, I asked you about the property owner's sort of a management agreement document. I see that you're following up on that. In addition to providing a draft to the town attorney, if you could provide us with a copy as well, so we would have some idea beforehand what we're dealing with. Is that doable?
Yes.
Great, thank you. The design standards of the grocery store, we got this from, I believe it was from Mr. Welty. He had written some comments on here about I guess it would be the north elevation, which would be facing
They have been incorporated.
I saw that you did, and I just want to congratulate you on doing that. I don't know if there's anything else you possibly could do. It's a monolithic structure. There's only so much you can do design-wise to make it more friendly.
Well, they are willing to do more. I think that would point time when the building comes in for approval, we can discuss what might be appropriate, but they understand that there are residents looking down at the building.
Right.
Our engineer, in his report, item number 42, and it was something he brought up earlier today, was about the sizing. The sewer pipe sizing calculations indicate flow rates of over 1 million gallons a day. It was one of the few comments that the Chazen Engineering did not respond to, and I'm just wondering, do you have a response to that?
That's a new comment, I believe, that you're referring to. Is that correct?
We only just received the sanitary flow calculations with this most recent.
Okay, so for our next meeting, you'll have a chance to.
I'll give you the answer to the question in layman's terms. The system is completely failed, and there's a tremendous amount of infiltration, tremendous amount. That takes the flows up to 1 million gallons, notwithstanding the fact that there's no users on the site. That's why we were able to score extremely high on a loan, a low interest rate loan to make improvements to the system, because the state and the DEP understands that this is a terrible infiltration problem. It's been documented for almost a decade now as to being the problem, and that's the source of the infiltration.
And that's been going on. I went to a meeting there 25 years ago and met with the state engineer on site, and it was bad then. I can't imagine what it's like now.
So that's the infiltration. We're only approved inclusive of the off-site users estate for 500,000, which is what we've designed to, which is more than sufficient for everything once the pipes don't have holes.
Absolutely.
And just to be clear, the design does accommodate that additional flow, even in the event that it's corrected by either taking that connection away from the state as they're proposing to do as a separate project by the state. We're still designing to that overall flow, in the event that we're online before they're offline.
And let's see, in the response document from Chazen Engineering, you also indicated that you're going to go ahead and prepare a map plan and report also for a water district in addition to the sewer district. Is that right?
It's still being discussed, the water district.
Yes, speaking with Don Beer on it, the issue is if there is an existing water district on the site, you don't actually need to form a new district. What would be done is within the context of the existing district, a district improvement would be undertaken, which would just deal with this site. You would still go through the typical public hearing and petition process before the town board. It's rather than creating a new district, you're just doing an improvement within the existing.
Right. The memorandum of understanding requires the water district. So,
right. Well, that district, one way or the other, there will be a water district and a sewer district at the site.
okay.
The issue is which section of the town law or general municipal law you can be using.
Okay. A couple of quick questions on the geotech report. One is, let's see here. This is from Chazen Engineering. At the time of this report, and Andy, I'm sure you've read this. At the time of this report, Chazen understands that the ground floor elevation for all 5 proposed residential structures are currently below the groundwater level when considering seasonal fluctuations. You've read the report, and you're okay with any of the proposed resolutions to this issue?
I didn't have any concerns with any of the recommendations.
Okay, good. And the other item was, just to be certain that you were in agreement, regarding the section 5.2 on excavation, we anticipate that excavation of the on-site soils can be accomplished using conventional earthwork equipment and techniques. I'm assuming that means no blasting. And you are comfortable with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have notes on there that would allow blasting, but it depends on what kind of rock they encounter, I suppose.
Okay.
Right, so that essentially means of the rock that they do come across, they think it will be rippable.
Can be ripped.
Right.
Okay. Finally, and I raised this question before, and I just wanted to lay it to rest tonight. The section under which this project was created, the Hudson River, or the historic, the HRDD district. District purpose number 1 was to promote the preservation and adaptive reuse of landmark structures in historic districts and historically open spaces. That's number 1. Now, as part of the agreement to ensure, the development agreement to ensure that Phase 2 would be completed, which would address the historic structures, the administration building, and so forth. Stated that a certificate of occupancy is issued for the first 200,000 square feet. Now that's being altered to 193,000 square feet. Yes.
We don't have to alter it, we can leave it at 200.
You could leave it at 200. Shall be known as the northern phase demolition trigger date. Okay, we're just referring to it as the trigger date. And then on that date, you or the developer would agree to secure a performance bond to ensure that certain work would be done on the administration and other buildings. And as a matter of fact, in one of the documents we have here, it says, there was a question about the trigger date, and the response was the applicant has provided the town with documentation supporting the applicant's commitment to Phase 2 on the project. And goes on to say that the date of CO was issued for the first 193,000 square feet of new non-residential floor area for commercial uses on the site. Now, my concern, as I have expressed, is the use of the word commitment. which is a promise or firm decision to do something, your commitment. It's not an obligation, which is an act or course of action to which a person is morally or legally bound. What we have here, which is of concern to me, and I am open to suggestions or to any language that would lay this to rest, is what we have here is a commitment with a threshold. We don't have an obligation. And that is my concern. In other words, in terms of satisfying a secret requirement where there is a section devoted to historic structures, if for any reason you build 190,000 square feet, that bond, that performance bond, which is your bond, so to speak, to go on to phase two and acquire that performance bond, really disappears. It could be through no fault of your own. And I don't know how to address that. I mean, if I had been at the table, I would have said, listen, give us a performance bond up front, and it would be end of story. But that's not the way the agreement was crafted. So now we have this commitment with a threshold requirement. If you don't meet that threshold, the potential there is there will be no performance bond.
Can you say something, David, because I know you worked with
Yeah,
I'm looking at the financials and.
Step back, because the purpose of the demolition trigger was not to ensure the completion of Phase 2.
Absolutely.
The purpose of that demolition trigger, when we were reviewing the development master plan before the town board, was to try to deal with the scenario if the developer at the time only developed the commercial Phase 1 and then decided to walk away. Is there a way of ensuring that the upper portion of the property could be made more attractive for another developer? So the thought was, before the entire commercial phase is completed, have them either start the demolition or issue a bond that would cover the demolition of the north and south wings of the administration building. Because that was about 75% of the demolition that would have to occur. And so then, once that demolition was undertaken, there would be a more attractive upper portion of the property. Now, there are two items that are before this board now, because we're no longer dealing with a development master plan that separates out your commercial phase from your residential phase. And so the danger, I think there are two things that the board really needs to look at. One is measuring the magnitude of the danger that was intended to be mitigated by that mitigation measure. Then the second is the potential risk that that danger would occur under the current proposal. So the big difference that you have now with this master plan, development master plan, versus what was approved previously is the commercial portion was dominated by a big box. So you had 182,000 square feet, give or take, of the big box, and then its supporting pad of a gas station and a bank. And the issue was if a developer walked away and all that was left was this commercial pad dominated by the big box store, the town was concerned that it would be left with yet another commercial plaza. Now, if you contrast what the development master plan is, or the proposed modification of the development master plan versus the approved development master plan, the commercial phase, or I shouldn't even call it the commercial phase, the phase 1 is now much different. So you don't have a big box anymore. You have your integrated Main Street retail, commercial, and more connections between residential and commercial. And you've got a residential component with that phase 1. So the danger that the town board was looking at in 2015, when we first entered into the development agreement, which then was incorporated into the finding statement dealt with a different scenario. The second issue, which is the measuring of the magnitude, the measuring of the risk that danger would become a reality now with this proposal, that's where and Marty had referred to it before, providing me, and I also went over with Mr. Welty, the budget and pro forma for the project, evaluating the basis of the developer's representation that at this point, if we were to just go through with phase one, and this is just assuming a full completion of phase one, they would still be in the red. By I think Marty said about $10 to $12 million because of all the costs up front of construction, site phasing, et cetera. And I don't want to dive too deep into the weeds, but the way that they got there was taking the construction costs and then looking at their potential income, assuming that the entire project was built, and then also looking at rate of return, et cetera, and then assuming on top of that all of the 134 units would be sold, you still get to that $11 million or so deficit. So from a financial perspective, the developer is saying, look, if we finish phase one, we're not going to be, there is incentive already to complete phase two. The question, Peter, that I think you're asking with respect to, well, what happens if they don't complete phase one?
If they don't complete the 192,000, if they complete 192,500 square feet.
Well, if that were the case, you still run into the issue of being in the red. But remember, the purpose of the trigger was not a guarantee that phase one would be completed or that the entire project would be completed.
I'm not questioning that. My concern is that there is no enforcement mechanism other than the commitment, which again is not an obligation, it's a commitment. And God bless you, I'm not questioning your word or your sincerity, but things happen. If that threshold is not met, then there's no bond.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the intent of the observation that the applicant's making is a commitment. I think the intent is that that commitment would be codified in a resolution to be approved by the board and/or by notes upon the plan, either or both of which are enforceable. Is that?
Well, the trigger would be you can't compel a private property owner to complete the project. Right. If ultimately the market goes south, you can't hold a gun to their head and say you still have to complete it. So, and that wasn't the scenario that that trigger is crafted for.
I've taken up enough air. Let's move on. That's all I have.
Can I ask a question? Sure. The quote commitment versus obligation is in reference to posting the bond as compared to completing the phase two work. Is that?
Really, the obligation is something it's a matter of language.
Yes,
in other words,
but are you looking for that in connection with the obligation to post the bond?
Yes.
As compared to the commitment to?
Yes.
No problem. We'll be obligated to post the bond at that point in time.
Doesn't make any difference, though.
Yeah.
There's a threshold.
Yeah.
And we're dogs chasing our own tails here. That's my concern.
Right.
The way it was worded, I don't know if you worded it or someone else did.
We'll post it, but I think we're giving you something that the bond pales into comparison to what we are giving you. It's pennies to millions of what we are giving you, and that is we're putting up over $28 million, and we're in the red, negative $12 million if we successfully complete the initial. If we wanted to lose $12 million, we could do it today or a year ago.
I like to do things in such a way that when you look back, you say, gee, I wish I had done it, in a certain way. And that's why we're having this discussion right now. It's not, it's
I'm
not a
trying to help. I
reflection
don't
on-
mean to be snide at all.
No,
I
it's not,
apologize if
it's
I...
not a reflection on you. I just like to see things that, you know, we're volunteers. And I hate to see people come one day and say, listen, why didn't you think of that? You know, when you had the chance, why didn't you do it when you had the chance? So that's why we're having the discussion.
It's good to look at all the details, make sure.
Thank you, thank you.
Go ahead, Ben, do you have any comments?
What can I say? Peter just asked all the questions I was going to ask.
His time is well spent.
I'm glad to see that you're working diligently with the staff and the engineers and the legal department. And from what I've read and what I've heard and seen, I'm comfortable that things are progressing favorably. One little issue has nothing to do, I don't think, with this approval, but Lot 14, the fire department. What's the story there? Liz brought it up. Things have to be determined.
We had an obligation to provide a couple of acres to the fire department. We did. It's set aside whenever they would like to take it, use it, it's for them.
Okay, so it's set aside for their
Yep,
use? And
correct. It was improperly, I think we referred to as open space, but it's dedicated for their use.
Okay. So we're not sure what's going to happen with that yet?
It's for the fire department.
Okay.
Whenever they wish to use it, take it, do with it what they want.
And kind of in the same vein, this could be an annex, but will the police department have any property here, or is it just going to be your own security?
It's not contemplated. We have on some sites offered substations, and if that becomes appropriate, we're not opposed to it.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, that conversation should continue with the police as well to make sure. All right, thanks, Ben. Let me go to Joan.
I don't have any questions, but my comments would simply be that, you know, it looks to be a project that's coming together nicely, and I appreciate Peter's concerns. I think it kind of echoes the board's efforts to try to cover all their bases, but I think it's looking really good, and thank you.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead, Rocco.
Yeah, hi. I like what's going on here. You guys certainly have done a lot of work since our last meeting, and I certainly appreciate that. One thing, though, to clarify further on the discussion with the access to the rail trail, anything that gets done, if it's shown on the Phase 1 site plan, does that imply or mean that that work will be done on Phase 1, or it will be done once? Okay.
Yes.
All right. I think that's what I have right now.
We have been meeting with Ron Hicks, whose pet project, I understand, is that, and we're going back and forth on exactly when and how and what.
Okay, well, that's really great, because I'm a user of the rail trail. I believe in it, and this would be a great asset for those people there. Thank you.
Thanks. Nicole?
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. I might be 82 when I leave.
All right, so a lot of my questions were already answered. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things. One, Liz had brought up some possible light spillage on the Route 9 and Hudson, which might be Heritage Now Drive intersection. So I just wanted you guys to keep an eye on that. With Tony Russo not being here, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things that he noted. As far as the crosswalks are concerned, you guys might have to put up some yield signs, yield to pedestrian signs. Also, there was some issues with some trucks maneuvering and turning plans for specifically fire trucks, garbage trucks, delivery trucks, and tractor trailers when they'll be coming through the site. So if you guys could take a look at that. Per the fire department, the medical building, there's a canopy proposed there. For ambulance, to get in there, the minimum, the canopy can be is about 14 feet, I believe they put in their information. Also, I wanted to bring up something that Stephanie Lewinson brought up. The power plant and also the Bryan Hall, I believe it's called. Why were they kind of slated for demolition and not cited for reuse? Was there some structural things there, or I was just curious?
You'd have to go back to the,
Well, I think the answer is Ryan Hall is right in the middle of the commercial development.
Okay.
And one can't proceed without the other. And the power plant was slated for removal because it's in the middle of the residential townhome development.
Okay, so it's pretty much
neither
because
were
of where
deemed
they're
to be
located.
at the same historic significance as the buildings to be preserved.
Yeah, we had just gotten some recent letters from people asking.
Yeah, so that's the answer. I mean, if the power plant could be used as something, viable, it'd be great to try to do so.
Okay.
I like reusing old buildings we have in the past as whenever we can and they're viable. So if it can be converted into something, we'll attractive and that fits into the residential development, we'll take a hard look at it.
Okay. And also a quick question about the admin building. Do you have anyone interested in that yet for doing like a hotel, boutique hotel?
We have a couple of discussions going on. One in particular with Marist for a use, and
For medical use?
no, for a arts and Center for Higher Education, Learning, Art and Education.
Okay.
We had a meeting today with Hudson Valley EDC, so we have a couple of discussions going on. First thing we have to do is get the new roof on and all of that. So one way or another, the building has to be watertight. And then the second phase will be what exactly to do with it.
Okay. And I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Nicole. I had a couple comments myself that not been addressed. I had a question just on apartments, the apartments in Phase 1, how they get their mail. Is there all individual mailboxes? Everybody's ordering online these days, getting packages, and that can become an issue if there's not a place to receive them.
We have the mail delivery and the package and all of that is usually handled by these service rooms,
Okay.
which have these lockers where delivery services can leave packages in and text a resident with the code. They can lock it, and the resident can then open and take their package out. That's how we've been handling it.
Okay, so that would be part of the apartment
Sure.
buildings? Or
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. And we already talked about the path. Yep. I think the one on the south end would be good if you could look at that. Didn't see anything for if the apartment owners have dogs, like a dog walk, or is there enough open space, you think?
Yeah, I'm sure it'll have dog walks and pet IDs. They're poop IDs.
Identify them for later prosecution.
Yes. It actually is a poop ID that'll identify. So if a resident has a dog, they have to register.
There you go. Sounds like a plan.
I love that.
It's part of the business.
We need that in some other areas
That's
of
a
town.
condition of approval.
Architecture, I guess, one of the main concerns that people have asked about, the more peaked roofs, I think, is not so much looking up from Route 9, but looking down from the apartment buildings.
Yep.
Also, the way to screen the HVAC equipment so it looks nice. You don't want to see
Agreed.
just that big box there. And
Yep.
And lastly, I guess, as just a comment on Phase 2 as you move, consider, as like Paul mentioned, and someone mentioned the power plant, but also, I don't know, maybe there's grants available or something to even look into as you negotiate with the hotels and whatnot, maybe some more of the the north wing or even pieces of south wing, whatever can be kept to incorporate. I'm just thinking because I recently looked at the Hotel Henry and that was in much better shape. Unfortunately, we've lost a lot of this to fire and weather damage over the years. But whatever you can think to do to make use of the most of the historic structures would be good when you come in for phase two.
That's really the difference. I mean, the Hotel Henry had a viable, structurally sound building that they started with. We just don't have that here.
Mm-hmm. And I believe the Ryan Hall that someone mentioned is in the grocery store parking lot somewhere there. So unfortunately, it's. I believe that was a newer building than the other ones that was
Yeah,
down
it's not the same age as the admin building or some of the others.
All right, I think we're good. Does anyone else have any further comments?
Yeah, I just want to say something, because I keep hearing power plant coming up. Just from my experience and my career, I know some people like the industrial look. It's, the lady said, it's trendy and things, but a power plant like this could be very well toxic and contaminated after so many years, and it could be dangerous to use a building like that, to reuse it. Okay?
We'll take a hard look at it.
All right, any other comments? All right, let's go to a motion then.
I move that the planning board direct staff and consultants to prepare resolutions regarding performance and seeker findings for a proposed modified development master plan, preliminary subdivision approval with conditions of the entire site, and Phase 1 site plan approval with conditions. The conditions in the above described approvals would be based on the comments of the planning board and those received from town departments and agencies, included but not limited to comments listed below, and also that the planning board direct the applicant to respond to comments of the planning board and those received from town departments and agencies, including but not limited to 1 through 16.
And I'd like to add 17, the issues discussed tonight.
And 17 issues discussed tonight.
To investigate various things from the trail to the power plant to the, et cetera. And it was seconded again? Okay.
Second?
Call to question, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming in tonight and for the continued push through all these details.
Thank you.
We'll need to talk about.
Big project, a lot of details to work through.
Yeah, we're going to try to have Kyle work with our staff as quickly as possible so we can get you the answers and the final materials right away, so it's not, right before the next hearing. This way we'll be ready at the next hearing to close it up.
And then
Right. We'll need to work on a schedule, I think, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, I know you still have a bit of work to do, Kyle, and then, for us as well, we'll need to make sure we button it all up and get it right, so, okay?
Thank you.
Do that, yeah.
Great, thanks. Anything further? Any other business tonight? I move we terminate the meeting.
Second.
Moved and terminated, called to question, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nobody opposed? Okay. Meeting termination.